Hello everyone, we are back, and in this session we're going to talk about the remaining socializing agents, which are the institutional agents of socialization. And we are going to talk first of all about the workplace. Last week we talked, or in our last session we talked about the family, we talked about education or the school system, and we also discussed peer groups. And so we know that the family and we know that peer groups are considered to be social agents of socialization or social groups. And this next session where we're talking about institutional agents of socialization, the school system is included in that because it's a societal system. It's not necessarily a social group per se, but it's a system set up by society that everybody has to participate in, basically. And so the next group of topics that we're going to talk about are going to be the workplace, religion, government, and mass media. And so when we look at the workplace, we're looking at the workplace, and we're just remember that when we talk about socialization, we're talking about it from an American perspective. Every culture, country, and society has its own mechanisms of socialization, has its own agents of socialization. And although the topics might be labeled the same, how these topics are explained or defined are different, and they're all based on the society that you live into. So take that into consideration. So when we look at the workplace, we know that like children spend a majority of their time in the school system or at school during the day, parents or older adults spend the majority of their time in the work environment. And they spend more time in the work environments than children necessarily spend in school. Because although the average work week is 40 hours a week, we have people who are spending 80, 100, or even more hours at work. And so when you enter into each of these institutional agents or institutional systems, they have their own socialization process that you have to participate in. So when you go to work every day, you cannot take the socialization process from home or from school or from your peers into the workplace, because you're now entering into basically another, quote, society or culture. And so the workplace becomes a place where it is a certain requirements, or it requires a new level of socialization, as I said. And this is in terms of the material and non-material culture of the workplace, or the place that you participate in work. And so some of the material culture of your work environment might be learning how to use the computer, or learning how to operate a copy machine, or learning how to process mail, or learning how to answer the phone. It all depends on what your particular job description is. That's how that particular job or workplace will socialize you. And so you are learning, you have a material and a non-material culture that you have to deal with in your workplace. And so, you know, there was a time where when we worked, you know, people worked, you know, one job, you know, all their lives, and they would pass down those skills to their children, you know, just like those who work in mines, who dig coal, or, you know, those who farm, or who maybe even lawyers and doctors have a tendency to pass down those skills and those traditions to their children. And so the workplace has a tendency to have a sort of a pattern to it as well. But it's also a socialization process that you have to go through when you go into the work environment. It does not matter how long you work at that particular job or how short a period of time you work there. Sometimes you can know if that job is for you within the first week. Some people can take a job and the next day they're like, I'm not going back there, because they could not really fit into that culture. They could not fit into that system. It didn't work for them. So they had to go and find another place to work. But for those who do fit into that culture or that system, that work environment, they have a tendency to be socialized, to understand what the norms of those jobs are, what the beliefs of those jobs are, what are the values that their employers hold. And so they have a tendency to have to implement that or integrate that into their own lives. And so they begin to play roles on their job. And so we will get into role play in one of our upcoming videos, but that's going to be a very, very interesting topic that we're going to talk about. But we understand now in 2018 that people in their lifetime can work sometime up to 10, 15, 20 jobs, which was unheard of a while back, where people were working. My mom worked one job. She was a master beautician. She worked one job, and that's all I've known her to ever do all her entire life. My dad was a brick mason. And so that's all they did all of their lives. But my mom was, she was socialized in the 30s. My dad was socialized in the 20s. So the 1920s, 1930s. So they were far in between when I was socialized, and when my children were socialized, and when my grandchildren today are being socialized. And so the systems have a tendency to have their own particular rules and values and norms that they expect the participants to function and operate in. And so when you look at your job, you can see more structure on your job than maybe necessarily in the family system. On your job, you have a tendency to feel more of the pressure to conform, because they are giving you something for your labor. So there's an exchange or a bartering system that is happening. On your job, you go to work every day because you're expecting to get a paycheck after a period of time. So it's a give and take. So the pressure is there for you to conform, whether you like the job or not. If it's paying what you want it to pay, we have a tendency to say, okay, I can stick this out a little while because I like the money. But that's not what's happening to you. It's not about you just getting paid. You're being socialized in a particular culture or a particular environment, and that is influencing how you act when you leave that particular job. And so we know that there is a diversity of work areas that people take. There are lawyers, doctors, nurses, teachers, police officers, politicians, beauticians, school teachers. We have those who are gardeners, or we have biologists, scientists. We have all types of jobs that people take. And each one of those jobs are being operated in through a system, an environment, or a work environment. And so that's I think that's pretty easy for people to understand the work environment and how they have to participate in the socialization process in order to function properly on that job. One of the very, very important material objects of socialization for the work environment is the job description. You know how you get your job description when you go to work? And it's laid out what they expect from you, your educational level, what you have to, the experience you have to bring before you can even take the position. There's an expectation that you have already been processed to some degree to fit into your workplace. And so that becomes very, very important. And so the workplace is another very important area of socialization, because it, as we stated earlier, poor people who are on the lower class, the working class, the poor, the middle class, have a tendency to teach their children to be obedient and to conform to society. Whereas the rich, the upper class, the blue collar worker, the very rich the Borgios, I guess you would call them, or the blue bloods. Those are really up there in a richer society, has a tendency to teach their children to be more judgmental, to be more analytical. And so they have a tendency to have a different level of influence when they're talking to their children. But each of these class of people are socializing their children also based on how they're socialized at work. So as you can see, the process of socialization continues even after you leave your home environment and you leave the school and you get from around your peers. You're still being socialized. It does not stop. And so the next level that we're going to talk about is religion. Now, some people would say, religion is a private choice. But religion is not a private choice. When you look at society, religion is a system in society. It's one of the biggest institutions in society. And whether you know it or not, religion is governed by society. You cannot perform any kind of religion that you want to. You do know that. You cannot, even today in America where we have religious freedom or the freedom of religious expression, there are boundaries. In some religions, they sacrifice humans. We can't do that in America. Some people may do it underground, but that's considered deviant behavior. That's considered abnormal. That's not a normal part of being a normal socialized member of society. And so religion has a tendency to be overlooked as an institution in society. It has a tendency to not be really valued to the degree that it should be valued as a system, because it becomes more personal. We defend it more. You talk about my religion, you talk about what I believe, you're offending me if you say something or you cross me. It's basically on the same level almost as our politics. So while some religions have a tendency to be more informal institutions, we're talking about more focusing on practice related to formal institutions. Religion is also a very important avenue of socialization for many people. We have synagogues, temples, churches, mosques, and all types of religious communities where people gather to worship and learn. And whether you know it or not, even when you become a part of a religious institution, you also have to adhere to the rules and regulations of those institutions. You have to be socialized to fit into those institutions. And so while some might call it doctrines or belief systems, or with the book religion, some might say, we have to adhere to the laws or the commandments. It does not matter what you call it. It's still rules, regulations, norms, values, and beliefs of that particular religious system that you are being socialized to conform to. Now, if you think about it, in your family system, you might have been brought up to be a Christian, or you might have been brought up to be a Muslim, or a Catholic, or a Jew, or a Hindu, or a Buddhist. There's so many different religions out here that influence and socialize our lives. A lot of it has to depend on what you got when you were at home with mommy and daddy. Statistically, we could look at in the United States, we can look at the Pew reports and do a lot of our statistical analysis from there about how so many people are now changing their religion from what they traditionally believed and grew up on. They're now becoming more independent in their religious choices. But it does not matter how you break it down. The religious system that you adhere to, that you join in, has a socialization system within it. It is a culture. It is a culture that is that demands a certain level of response in how you are to function in that religious system. And so they teach their participants how to act, how to interact. There's a material culture. Like the way some people might pray. Some people might pray 3 times a day. Some people might pray 1 time a day. Some people might only pray when they gather with the congregation. But regardless of, how you look at it, religion teaches you how to interact with your material culture. And some of you might even take communion. Some of you might not take communion. Some of you might have to, go on a fast, and some of you might have to, not eat meat. Some can't eat pork. These are all socialization processes that you are going through. And so no matter what you want to call it, society says your religion, you can participate in your religion as long as your religion participates in the greater norms and values of the society in which it is functioning. That was a lot, but I hope you got that. And so for some people, religions teach us ceremonies such as marriage and having, where you go in and you Christian the baby. Or even baptism, communion, fasting, prayer. So you're participating in ceremonies in these religious organizations or religious systems. Not every religious system marries their congregants the same way. Some people jump over brooms, break glass. Some people take communion. Some people light a bunch of candles. I mean, it's so many. It's unbelievable the degree of diversity of religious systems out here, but yet and still they all fall under the greater system of the society in which you live. You wonder why we have religious wars and why governments are involved in religion, because religion is a part of the institution of the society in which you live, and it cannot function outside on its own. That means you can't just make up a religion and have it function in society, without there being some type of greater societal regulation on it. There's some things you can do and there's some things you just cannot do. Now, we got a lot of liberty and a lot of freedom, which gives us the illusion that we have religious liberties, but that is not always the case. And so many of the institutions of religion also determine your gender norms. They determine who you will interact with as far as marriage, as far as your sexuality, as far as how you even engage in your sexuality. And so, you may think, I know my religious belief system does not believe in, same-sex marriage. It does not believe in, women wearing pants, or men wearing jewelry or shorts or something. I don't know. But what you don't understand is that while that may be a function of your religion, if you take your sociological imagination and you look at the requirements and doctrines and norms of the religion that you're in, and you apply that to the greater society, and you look at society and say, what are the gender norms of the society that I live in? I guarantee you that they will conform to the religious norms that you are applying in your life. And so you have a lot of religions that are fighting right now to keep out same-sex gender marriages or relationships. And they're not just fighting within the confines of their religious culture. They're fighting in the larger society through politics, through laws and legalizations, through legislation, through politicians. They're fighting to keep certain norms normal. not just in their religious system, but in society. They're trying to have that spill over into society because religious institutions are a part of the normalization of the society in which you live. So you have to religions have to be brought into perspective. You can't just go off half-baked and say, I can believe what I want to believe. You don't get to tell me what I believe. Yeah, you can within the confines of the society in which you live, and also within the confines of the socialization process that you have gone through. That's how you develop your beliefs anyway. You are socialized to believe the way you believe. You might be given some choices, but even in giving those choices, you're making the choices from the choices that you're given. So it's funny. This process of socialization gets to be real intricate in who we are and who the selves that we become, the personalities that we become. When we really look at socialization, we can really look at it and say, wait a minute, who socialized me to believe this? How did I get this belief system? How did I choose this particular religion? And why is it that I'm just so profoundly influenced and indoctrinated to believe the way that I believe? Why is it that I'm afraid to challenge some things? Why is it that what I consider to be sacred and profane in the religion that I'm in, some other religion does not necessarily believe that that thing is sacred or that other thing is profane? However, if you look again at the larger society, what does society believe is sacred and profane? What does society believe is normal and abnormal? We have a tendency to look from society to ourselves, but sometimes we got to begin to look at that, take that sociological imagination and look from ourselves into the larger society. Take our issues and our social issues and say, how does this fit into the normal society? How many other people are experiencing the same thing I'm experiencing? How many other people are being challenged in their thoughts and their belief systems? How many other people are questioning why they believe what they believe? Is it just me? No, it's not just you. And so you are not an island to yourself. Also, we know that religion has a ceremonial rites of passage that reinforce the family unit. The religion influences who's the head and who's not in your household, whether you think they do or not. Because each of the leaders in your home, your mother, your father, your two mothers or your two fathers or whatever it is, the dynamic of your family is, it could be your grandmother raising you. It could be your auntie raising you. You could be an adopted home. It does not matter. Whatever home you're in, whatever belief system that family has adhered to is also why you're being socialized the way you're being socialized. Because when they leave the home and they go back to that particular institution, whether it's a synagogue, a mosque, a temple, or wherever you go to worship, whatever it is your leader is telling you, or your belief system is telling you, or your religious book is telling you, it's going to influence how you socialize your children. So you're not getting away from it. It's all intertwined. It's all a mesh. And you are intertwined in the middle because you are the very thing that the system needs to keep itself normal. And so we know that religion reinforces gender roles. Religion fosters a shared set of socialized values, and they are passed on through society. The very people who tell you what it is you're free to believe or free not to believe, even when we look at the Supreme Court, who's supposed to be the highest legal system in our land, who determines and defines what our legal system says, what our Constitution is saying. These people have been socialized to believe what they believe. The conservatives, the liberals, the Republicans, the Democrats, the independents, all of us. It doesn't matter what group you are in. Society loves groups. Society does not like individualization. Not American society does not want you to be an individual. It wants you to keep a group mentality. So it doesn't matter how many groups you form, as long as there is a portion of that group's influence that continues to adhere to the norms and values of the society in which it is developing. And so look at religion. Religion has a greater influence in our lives than what we have assumed that it would have. And so you can't just say, I believe this, and because I believe this, and I can act this way. We're looking right now at our politics, and we're looking at our international relationships, and we understand that there is societies that have been socialized to believe a certain religious belief about American people. Americans been socialized to believe a certain thing about other countries' religious systems. And so we fight, and we war, and we battle, and we make legislation, and we make rules and regulations, and we interact, and we have summits of all types and kinds. And so even today, if we look at our political system, there is such a war in our political system. But how much of the war for religious freedom is actually embedded in the values and norms of the ones who are fighting for it? In other words, why is so many of our politicians who are conservative Christians, why are so many of them found committing infidelity? Why is it that so many of them are being accused of sexual abuse or of money laundering or doing things that are illegal? Such heavy deviant behavior. But yet, they're the very ones who are helping to establish the rules and regulations and norms of society. You cannot separate what is the word I want to use? You cannot separate man's frailty from his desire to be perfect. They're intermingled in one another. Perfection and imperfection, duality. All of this comes out of religion. We say the highest authority is God. Who determined who God is? Who determines what God is? Society does. Because society gives you your language. Society gives you your definitions. It gives you your words. It teaches you your language. It explains and defines your feelings, your emotions. Without your socialization, you wouldn't know what anger was. You wouldn't know what you were feeling, how to describe it. You would just feel something. You wouldn't know how to describe levels of pain if society had not told you there's levels to your pain. And so while this may sound a little spooky, this is socialization. It doesn't sound spooky to a sociologist. It doesn't sound spooky to a psychologist. It doesn't sound spooky to a scientist. Sociology and psychology are social sciences. So we really have to begin to look at ourselves and say, wait a minute, what is going on? And not to prolong this, that's just to give you a little idea of what we're talking about. Our next level or agent of socialization that falls under institutional agents of socialization will be the government. And we talked about the government. So we think of the rite of passages that people go through, but these rites of passages that are based on age are established by the government. The government has given you developmental stages. The system's giving you developmental stages. They give you, you're a toddler, you're a teenager, adolescent, you become an adult, you become a senior, you become an elder, blah, 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 so forth and so on. You fall into these categories because the government has established these categories. So You think that you're defined as an adult because you're just an adult? No. What is an adult? What is a teenager? What is a toddler? What is a baby? What is a mother and a father? You know, what tells me that I'm an adult now? Is it because I just turned 18? Or is it because the government says at 18, you're allowed to do this, you're allowed to do that, you're allowed to experience this, you're allowed to do that. You don't no longer need your parents you don't no longer have to ask your parents for this or to do that. Your parents no longer have to sign for you for this or for that once you turn a certain age. Well, who said that? It was the government. It was the government. And that's the age that the government says you are legally responsible for yourself, and they will no longer hold anyone responsible for your actions. That is set up by the government. As you age, you know, you become eligible for senior benefits. Why? Because the government said you could. Not just because you turned 65 or 67 or 72. It's because the government said it. It's another system. It's another socializing agent. And even when you become 18, there are certain things you are expected to do. There are certain norms you are expected to follow. There are certain roles you are expected to play when you turn 18. Even when you turn 65, there are certain functions in society that you are expected to perform. And there are functions that you are no longer expected to perform. In society, they say when you turn 65, you get some breaks. You might get discounts at the movies. You might get discounts on your food. You no longer have to work. You can get a retirement check, blah, 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 blah. You know, there are so many benefits. But who sets up these benefits? The government does. The government does. And so when the government sets it up, or you are socialized to experience those things that are those benefits that are set up for you. Yeah, you can vote. You can vote, and you can actually lobby for certain legislations, and you can go in and you can do all kinds of marches and blah, blah, blah. And you can try to influence the government. But it doesn't matter. When it's all said and done, everybody votes and their ideas go into the pot, and then it goes to Washington. And that system in Washington, however, no matter how bureaucratic it is, no matter how much red tape or blue tape or green tape there might be, they set up and they determine the laws. And then those laws go to another department, which I believe is the State Department, and they determine how are we going to apply these laws into the larger society. And so it does not matter how you look at it. It's all socialization.